What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Dr. Seth Gillihan. Dr. Seth, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Michael. Look forward to talking with you.
Yeah.
I'm a clinical psychologist, so that means some people confuse psychology and psychiatry. So I'm the one who does psychotherapy primarily. I don't prescribe medication. So do diagnosis. I used to do a lot of therapy, and I've transitioned in recent years toward more creating resources, either directly for consumers like books and card decks for using some of the practices that people find effective, and also creating courses for again individuals dealing with anxiety. I'm working on one now on depression, but also courses for professionals, people who work directly with clients who are in therapy. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah, I focus primarily on mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy, and I've sort of joined those two, integrated them into mindful cognitive behavioral therapy, and treat a lot of anxiety, depression, and all the stuff that comes along with that, like sleep issues and of course some personality issues that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, and that's how I as I do with most of guests of your caliber, I find via psychologytoday.com, and you had a blog post on there about personality traits, specifically, if I remember correctly, what negative childhood events develop what negative personality traits. And so we're going to jump into that. And so first, as the folks that listen know, I like to define things. So what are personality traits?
Yeah, personality is interesting because it's a common word. It's not a technical word always, but we mean a particular thing when we use it in psychology. So it's the relatively stable traits that people show across time and across situations. So this can involve behavior. They tend to do similar things in similar situations. Thoughts, so, certain ways of thinking, certain styles of thinking, and emotions. We tend to have certain, like an emotional tone that's fairly consistent. So, and I'm saying, I'm hedging a little. It's not like we're always the same person in every situation. They're relatively stable traits. I'm a different person with you than I am with someone I know, I've known for longer, or with my wife. And that's a good thing. It's good to be different with different people. But we're relative, but the rankings of who we are don't change that much, by which I mean, on average, we're all going to be probably more energized at a party than we are at work. But if my coworker is super energized at work and I'm more laid back, then when we both get more energized at a party, he's still going to be more energetic than I am. Right. So our relative rankings haven't changed, even though our absolute kind of expression of those traits has. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It just opens up all kinds of questions, but I don't want to go down any rabbit holes of that nature right now, because I don't know if we'll get out of them, because there's so much fascination to me about that particular topic, and some of the things you said just ticked off some things, but I got to focus.
Well, maybe one thing I'll add, if I could, Michael, is that there are only so many personality traits. Then there are different numbers of them depending on whose system people use, but most consistently they kind of boil down to 5 main traits. Those are called the big 5 personality factors.
Okay.
And these were developed, I think, I don't know. Wow, I was going to say about 20 years ago, but I think this is in the 80s. So, probably 40 years ago or more. So, so the big 5 there's an acronym that makes it easy to remember: OCEAN, OCEAN. So O for openness, how open you are to new experiences versus being sort of, closed down, rigid. C for conscientiousness. So do you tend to take care of things, show up on time, meet your responsibilities versus sort of blow things off?
Right.
A is agreeableness. So this is a big one for getting along with people.
Mm.
Do you tend to be easy to get along with, kind of go with the flow, roll with things, or
Right.
are you argumentative, arrogant, difficult? E. I skipped one. I can't spell ocean. So I skipped the E. E is extroversion.
Okay.
You tend to draw energy from being around people, or does that take energy from you?
Mm.
So you can be introverted or extroverted, and all of these are dimensional. So you can
I
be
was
on
gonna say, yeah.
one end or the other. You're not one. It's not like it's not a type, like a typology, like Myers-Briggs,
Oh,
where
okay.
you have like I am this or I am that. You're
Okay.
somewhere on a continuum.
Yeah.
And the N, I do remember it ends with an N, is neuroticism. So that's the tendency to experience negative emotions. So people high in neuroticism are prone to depression, prone to anxiety disorders,
Hmm.
prone to a lot of anger. So that just sort of gives us the lay of the land in terms of the kind of variability or the different types of traits we're talking about in human variation.
Right. And why I think this is important, especially around childhood events and how they affect things, is I think I don't think I know our relationships end in divorce largely due to the impact that negative childhood events have had on us, because I think it can and does I think create negative traits that affect how we deal with people, and then thus um, can affect how we have relationships and how we navigate them. And so I think it's really important to be able to look back and realize that, yes, you may have done some really stupid things. You might have screwed up. You might have these not ideal ways of being, but they come from somewhere. And it's not to shirk responsibility, throw your hands up and say, see, it's not my fault. But I think it does at least take the pressure off you to realize that you did what you knew because of the childhood that you went through. And so it can, I think it allows you to go, okay, I'm not a complete piece of shit. It's just I had these experiences. So on that note, let's talk about some of the childhood events that can lead to negative traits. What are some things that children go through that lead to some of these traits that we're going to talk about in the future?
Yeah, it's a great point that you raised too, Michael, that we can understand our history, and that can help us to understand where some of our tendencies come from.
Yeah.
Again, personality is interesting because there's a lot of research, many studies trying to figure out what causes someone to have one personality, someone else to have another. And like most psychological traits, it turns out it's about half, say 40 to 50%, can be explained by differences in genes. So variation in our genetics can account for about half of the variation in our personalities. So that part is relatively fixed. But then what explains the rest? Now this well, I won't get into the technicalities of
Oh,
it,
you
but
can, man. You can. Feel free.
okay. Well, uh this is often interpreted as, oh, okay, so half of my personality came from my genes and the other half came from my life experiences.
Right.
But that's not what these measures are about. They're not asking for this individual, where did personality come from?
Hmm.
They're saying, let's say you've got a group of 1,000 people and you have variability in personality. Some people are highly extroverted, some people are highly introverted, etc. So we want to ask, how much do the genetic differences between people explain those personality differences? So it's a technical definition and a technical way of calculating it. But if you think about, it's based on differences in genes and differences in personality, differences between people. If you're just looking at one person, there's no variability, there's no difference. It's just
Right.
that person's personality. So,
Right.
so just something to keep in mind. It could be, maybe for one person, they had such a huge dose of some of the negative life events that we'll talk about, that maybe that had a huge effect. Maybe that explains 90% of their personality. maybe, with a different family or different history, they would be a very different type of person.
Right.
Whereas for someone else, maybe, they're relatively kind of mild childhood and upbringing. And so most of what we're seeing for their personality is just their genes coming through, because there weren't a
Gotcha.
lot of kind of formative events that shape their personality.
Yeah. So I mean, it seems like there's a lot of variables here, and but I think it's at least good to know that at least some of your negativity or your negative traits are or due to the childhood. And I think it's like I said, I think it's important to examine that a little bit, because I think it does take some pressure off. But I find it interesting that you say that at least or around half just comes from genetics. I would have not thought that our genes would affect our personality. That's fascinating to me. That's probably a topic um, for another episode. But so that leads me to a question: is, and we'll come back to these negative childhood events, but and I think you mentioned this in the blog post. Personality, is it fixed or can it be changed?
Yeah, another big question. It's relatively stable. So if you measure someone at one point in time and measure them again, months or even years later, they'll tend to be correlated, maybe highly correlated. It probably won't be exactly the same, but what would it be like? I'm trying to think. Like height is probably it's more fixed than height. That's probably once you're an adult.
Right, right.
Um, but it was thought for a long time that, well, personality is that's just your personality. Once you're an adult, it's sort of locked in.
Right.
And if you see variability, then that's probably due to just errors in measurement, or maybe differences in your kind of state that day. Maybe you're having a rough day or a great day.
Right.
But there are more studies now showing that to some extent personality can be changed. Some of this is actually neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions is, there's some of the best evidence for personality change is around neuroticism.
Well, I mean, that sounds fucking awesome to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that
most people.
means if you got some bad shit, don't fret. You can work on it. I mean, I think that's awesome. That's exciting. I hope it gives some hope to folks out there that once we get to talk about some of these negative traits, can go, okay, it is possible. And if it's particularly those things of personality are a little bit changeable, malleable, whatever you want to define them as, I think that's fucking exciting.
Yeah, that was actually the title of the journal article. Fucking exciting news for personality. But seriously, I love your humanizing approach is a nice balance to my kind of drier discussion of these things. So I think that's great. But yeah, I think it is exciting. I think
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know of anyone who would be disappointed to know that we can reduce neuroticism. Like, not those of us who are highly neurotic,
Sure.
not people who know and love them or don't love
Yeah.
them.
Right.
As I mean, we're different from, like, yes, we can make you less agreeable. Like,
Right.
well, okay, maybe
Right.
interesting, but not great.
Yeah.
Um, but but yeah, so, and it doesn't seem like it necessarily takes that long. Like there's some studies showing that in as little as 4 weeks of therapy, a person can have a significant drop in their neuroticism. So,
Why is that, you think?
well, I think to some extent, neuroticism reflects kind of what's going on with you at the time. So
Uh,
if you're really depressed or in a really anxious and stressed state, it's going to turn up your neuroticism. So it's going to look like personality, but then once a person is out of that really intense time,
mm,
maybe through the help of therapy, then things are going to quiet down. I mean, if we think of our own lives and times we've been going through a really difficult time, and then maybe we met someone during that time and they just think of us as this person, like,
right.
oh, like, yeah, Seth's always stressed out, or Seth's
Yeah.
always complaining about his health, or yeah, Seth seems like really nervous or low energy, and it looks like personality. And maybe it's consistent across time, but that's not who I always was. And, if I start feeling better, then that can change. So yeah, there's definitely hope. Personality can shift. I don't think someone who's extremely on one end is likely to end up extremely on the other, but significant changes and improvements that we notice and other people notice, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's hopeful, because I think guys that are going through this process are absolutely dealing with that neurotic side, depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
loss of identity, like all these negative things that occur. So to me, that provides hope, which is sort of the central thing that I try to do. But let's swing it back around and talk about some of these negative childhood events. I'm pretty sure I can't remember exactly what my ACE score is, which is the adverse childhood
Yeah.
experiences. I'm sure it's like 6 out of 9. I think is 9 is the number, maybe.
Usually 10, I think.
Is
I
it 10?
think.
I have a lot of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can relate to and understand some of these things, but let's hone in on it. What are some of these
Mm.
negative childhood events?
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, the things that tend to affect personality aren't, it's usually not like, oh, I went to school and got a good grade that day,
Right.
right? Or
Yeah.
they tend to be pretty negative and even dramatic events. So things like losing a parent, that's a common one. And losing a parent, there are actually sadly many ways to lose a parent. I mean, the most obvious is through death,
Right.
but divorce is a common one. Maybe just not seeing a parent as often, or maybe not at all
Yeah.
anymore in some cases.
Yeah.
Um, Losing a parent to incarceration,
Mm.
that can be a big one. Um, Major mental health struggles for a parent, a parent who's severely depressed, or has a psychiatric condition like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, um, or a major problem with drugs. All those things, the kind of ruptures in that foundational bond, or all those are big, and those are the way I've described them. Those ones are fairly impersonal, meaning they're not directed against the child. But then, of course, there are not uncommonly things that are directed against a child, like physical abuse, sexual abuse,
Mm.
or kind of on the other side, just profound neglect,
Yeah.
or witnessing violence in the home. Seeing one's mom being hit by a dad or a stepdad. So
How much is something like arguing classified as violence? Like not like small. I'm talking shit was thrown and like yelling and screaming. Is that in the realm of violence? I would think it would be.
yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you asked that, Michael. It's yeah, it makes me so sad to imagine how I mean how often that's happening. That kids are being exposed to that type of thing, and I mean violence. There, yeah, lots of forms of violence. And even if it's quote unquote just words,
Right.
I mean there are violent words, there's a violent tone, there's kind of a sense of danger, of threat. And when you're little and your life is in the hands of these big people, then that can be a, yeah, terrifying experience, a traumatic experience, one that really imprints itself on the nervous system and kind of casts casts a person in a certain way that then we're set up to react to other situations, maybe in ways that helped us at the time but that aren't helping us now.
Yeah, that's something I can speak to with a lot of knowledge. I grew up in a very chaotic home, very chaotic childhood. My mother's probably borderline personality disorder, lots of arguing, fighting, yelling between my parents. Not all the time, because at a certain point, my dad became an over the road truck driver, so he wasn't around as much from like 11, 10, 11 or so till I left. But those sort of formative years, that was sort of par for the course. And I think it absolutely shaped how I handle frustrations in life. I've done so much fucking work on myself that I feel like I'm getting much better at it. Like a lot better. Like that's one of the frustrating things is you can't measure it.
Yeah.
But it's something that deeply affected me. And sometimes I hear, the explanation for some of these divorces is that, you know, we were always fighting, and some folks feel like that's, you know, something that can be fixed, and I don't disagree, but if it's you that doesn't want to argue and fight, it's tough to make someone stop arguing and fighting. Do you, I know this is again a rabbit hole sidebar, but do you think that it's possible to consistently and always de-escalate a situation, or is it just, is that not even possible because you can't affect the other person if they want to be, if that's their childhood, if that's their imprint is chaos and
Mm.
arguing and fighting, like without being a trained individual, is it possible for you to stop that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think ideally it's possible for each of us to act in a way that has a chance of de-escalating a situation.
Sure.
But ultimately, yeah, the control is out of our hands when it's the other person. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we always have the ability to act in that way,
Right.
you know, because we're human.
Yeah.
There are times when we're like, you know, God damn it, I don't want to de-escalate this. I know I
Right.
could, but
Yeah.
that's not happening.
Yeah.
And we just get so overloaded and triggered.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but yeah, I mean, there are that you mentioned borderline personality,
Yeah.
and that's another majorly difficult thing to grow up with as a kid.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, sometimes there's no appeasing someone, you know, trying to appease them. It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't,
Yeah.
which really is kind of the signature borderline personality. I remember someone, actually it was Aaron Beck, you know, the guy who primarily developed cognitive therapy.
Mm.
He's talking about this, you know, working with this young woman, and he said something like, you know, he told her what they might work on. Like, okay, here's some things, you know, that we might work on together. She said, "Oh, so you got it figured out, huh? You're just going to tell me what to do." He said, "Oh, you know, no, we can, you know, I'm happy to collaborate with you. We can, you know, make this, you know, something we do together. So what would you like to work on?" She said, "I don't know. You're the doctor."
That's, I think that's borderline personality to a T, right?
Isn't, yeah, you just can't win.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the way I that's how I experienced childhood, and I also unfortunately think I developed some of those traits myself. But again, a lot of work, and I think I was never full blown, I don't believe. I, at the end of the marriage, I thought I was. That was the narrative, especially
Mm-hmm.
coming from her. And then I read this book called Hard to Love, which is about men that have borderline personality. And I would put that book down and go, my goodness, I am nothing like these fellas.
Right.
Like it was such a, like a
Yeah.
relief in a way. It's like, yes, I might have some black and white thinking. I might have some of those types of, I'm hard to please perhaps, but I mean, there were some examples, and I guess you wouldn't write a book about mild examples, but those examples were like, oh shit, I'm not like that. Thankfully, I mean, I do have some negative traits for sure, and we all do. But speaking of that, what are the negative traits that develop from some of these chaotic childhoods, loss in childhood, you know, divorce, and the negative things that we just talked about? What are some of the things that develop due to those?
Yeah, there are five big ones that jump out to me from research studies. Um, we can go through these maybe one by one, kind of talk
Yeah,
about them. But
absolutely.
one thing I just wanted to add to what you said, I thought was so important about kind of misunderstanding or seeing yourself in a way that wasn't really who you were in your marriage, seeing yourself as like, oh wow, gosh, maybe I am borderline.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the importance of consistency of personality across relationships, across situations. And for a lot of us, our marriage relationship is where we kind of look the worst, right?
Yeah.
We bring out the worst in each other.
Yeah.
We, you know, it's hardest for us to get along with someone. We're our most neurotic, our least agreeable. So, and that may be somewhat specific to that relationship. So it's probably best not to judge ourselves just based on our marriage relationship. Like, wow, I guess I am kind of an asshole. Like, yeah, sometimes we
Right.
all are,
Yeah.
but not necessarily all the time.
Yeah, no, very true. And it's hard though, because when you're losing that identity, you're sort of trying to figure out like, who am I and what am I? And then in the beginning, because they're leaving, they're also painting you in this negative light to further their narrative, because they're not going to be
Right.
like, I say this all the time, they're not going to be like, oh, he is such the best, he's an amazing man, but I got to go. They're going to be like,
Right.
you do this, you do that, you're a, all these negative things. And so then you're left with, this rejection and this loss of identity, coupled with all this negativity being thrown at you. It's really difficult. And that's why, we talk about therapy. I can't recommend that enough. Like, it allows you to get that outside perspective. And that's what happened to me. So not only did I read the book, but I'm talking to my therapist. He's
Mm.
my longtime therapist. He's like, yes, you have some of the traits, but you don't have full blown borderline personality disorder. You just don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard to believe. But you keep going back and you keep, sort of pouring yourself out, and you get this feedback, and that's unbiased and from a neutral point of view, and it allows you to see yourself, at least not through the negative lens that has been created. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so anyway, so but back to the negative traits, because I definitely have some, as we all do. What are some of the ones that develop due to chaotic or shitty, for lack of a better description, childhoods?
Yeah. Yeah. The first is, we've talked about it a couple of times, but high neuroticism.
Mm,
So having, tending to experience a lot of anxiety, a lot of just distress, and generally being unhappy,
mm,
not having a lot of positive emotions,
mm.
and sort of just being, I mean, to some extent, just not a very happy person, not content.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. I wonder how many of us, how many people do you think walk around in that state of mind? Like, what's the percentage of people that are sort of just not content? Like, in at least, I don't know, in the world, the United States, I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, it's a good question about numbers. I mean, my impression is, to some extent, most of us,
yeah.
it seems like discontent is kind of our default.
Yes, I would
That's
agree. I would agree. But I
yeah.
think that's so, as weird as it sounds, that's so hopeful to hear, because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's not that it's just me. It's almost all of us, because spoiler alert, life is fucking hard.
Yeah,
And that, for some reason, gives me some kind of hope that it's not that I'm a broken human. I'm just a human.
exactly. Yeah, it's the human condition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll come back to that. That's such an important point. Important
Yeah.
point. Um, and again, not surprising, probably this second one, but having a really messed up childhood tends to lead to low agreeableness.
Hmm.
So it's a sad fact that on average it seems like, when shitty things happen in childhood, it doesn't lead to, well, okay. Yeah, it on average it doesn't lead to what we might think of as desirable personality traits. So it's sort of a gift that keeps on giving in a negative sense. That said, it's not hard for me to think of, God, a lot of people I know who've been through such hard things,
Hmm.
and yet there's something. I mean, the human spirit is so strong, and
Yeah.
there's some kind of love and joy and care and compassion that really comes through. So I don't want to paint this picture of, if you've been through a difficult
Right.
childhood, like you have a bad personality. Like,
Right. Right.
that's not it at all. And I can think of so many people who have suffered so much, and yet their hearts seem so full
Yeah.
toward others. And they would do anything for other people, even though they're still in a lot of pain themselves.
Sure. Well, those kind of people, I'm going to go ahead and throw myself in there. Those are the best people. Because despite your pain, despite your hurt, you're able to, and in maybe some ways you do it because of, um,
Mm,
but you're able to see outside of yourself and want to try and provide some support and help that maybe ultimately you want yourself. But I could see
mm,
it being sort of stuck in this not being agreeable and misery. Maybe that's not the right word, but just anger. I would say, would you say
Mm,
not being agreeable means you're sort of an angry person? Is that sort of a fair classification?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then just by the way, Michael, I didn't want to presume, but that was my impression of you, that you were among those people
I try.
who somehow, I mean, there's the Phoenix metaphor. I also think of alchemy,
Mm,
taking lead and managing to turn it into gold.
mm,
Yeah, anger and aggression is actually the third one I was going to talk about. So
okay.
that's yeah, very common to have a lot of anger, irritability, and it can lead to like impulsive,
Hmm.
like what's the word, like explosiveness, that
Mm.
type of thing.
Why is that? Why does that lead to that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, part of it seems to be that anger in a way, I mean, anger is a way of standing up for ourselves when we've been violated in some way, when our rights have been kind of
Right.
walked on, or someone's mistreating us.
Yeah.
And so if that's happened a lot, if we've either seen that happening a lot or we've experienced it ourselves, then we're primed to react in that way, to react with a lot of aggression. Um, and it also just goes along to some extent with high negative emotion, like when you're unhappy, when you're fearful. A lot of these things sort of seem to just, there's like this common pathway where they kind of funnel into more anger.
It's like a deep hurt from your
Mm,
foundation, right?
yeah, yeah, and anger. A lot of anger seems to be such a clear marker of pain.
Yeah.
Like think of an animal that's um like its leg is caught in a trap, or it's
Yeah.
like hurt,
Yeah.
and it's so, like, you don't get close to
Yeah.
that animal because it's going to
Yeah.
attack you. And I
Yeah.
think of my own dad, who went through some really difficult experiences in childhood. His dad killed himself,
Oh my
his parents
goodness.
divorced, his dad had major psychiatric problems after World War II. And my dad, for the first, I don't know, 10 years of my life or so, had so much anger. And I mean, it wasn't it wasn't directed toward us in abuse,
Right.
but he something would frustrate him, and I remember him throwing the bike pump he was trying to air
Mm,
something up with, throwing
right.
it for, I mean, to me at the time it seemed like he threw it like the length of a football field.
Right.
Probably threw it like 50 feet or something,
Yeah.
but yeah, just a lot of anger coming out of a place of pain.
Did that, if you don't mind, I'm gonna ask you a maybe personal question. Did that
Yeah.
lead you to do what you're doing now? Did that
Hmm.
experience lead you to this?
That's a very poignant question. In a way that I didn't realize at the time, I think absolutely.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I went, a lot of the time when people go into psychology or counseling or social work, they're sort of working out an issue in their own lives.
Yeah.
And I was really drawn to, when I went to graduate school, to treating anxiety and depression. But I hadn't been, well, I probably had been depressed, but didn't realize it
Right.
myself until years later.
Yeah.
Um, but in hindsight, it feels like part of it may have been an effort to sort of fix my family, or fix the pain that I'd witnessed in my family growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, my family is, there's a lot of love in my family, a lot of stability, um, but like in most families, also a lot of pain, a lot that was hidden.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting question, where sort of our own origins.
Yeah, I think it's just I find it interesting. I love sort of examining. Well, this is what we're doing now, right? We're examining
Mm,
motivations, or cause and effect and all these types of things. I think it's just so interesting and fascinating how we wind up who we are and why, and
yeah.
it all starts with childhood. But anyway, so we covered neuroticism, we covered agreeableness, we covered aggression. What's number 4?
Number four is low engagement. Just
Mm,
having a hard time sort of finding direction, a sense of purpose in life, kind of a consistent thread of involvement. Maybe adult friendships are hard to sustain.
mm.
Yeah, low engagement.
Interesting. I think men suffer from that one so very, very much.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's hard for me to, and I say this all the time. I'm sure people probably get tired of hearing it, but it's really hard to get men to engage and come together, especially when they're dealing with this type of situation. There's um, this tendency for us to be like, no, I got it, I'm fine, I'm gonna, I'll figure it out, or just sit in our misery and not reach out. And I, I, I don't I don't know why that is exactly. I think society has sort of trained us to be that way. I think,
Yeah.
reaching out as a man and shows a sign of weakness for some strange reason. But it's incredibly frustrating. Again, this is probably another topic that I could spend an hour talking about, but
Hmm.
we'll skip that rabbit hole. But okay, so then and we'll get to sort of what do we do about some of these things. But then what's number 5?
Yeah, the last one is kind of an external focus on like external markers of success. So
Mm,
things like really seeking and craving fame, wealth,
mm,
and it can show up in like, interpersonally with things like kind of an unhealthy sense of pride
mm,
or arrogance,
yeah,
and it doesn't. I mean, to me, it's not hard to understand if you think of the loss and pain and maybe deprivation of a painful childhood, and then this could be a way of trying to trying to protect oneself
mm,
from hurt or
yeah,
from loss, from being without. If a person grew up with not enough food, then being extremely wealthy is a way to guarantee that you never go hungry again.
yeah.
So again, there's this sort of sad, sort of tragic understandability about these traits.
I think I was going to come back to this because you mentioned about it coming back to this point, um, and I was going to do it later, but I feel like doing it now because there is a lot of, I think, to be human is to suffer. I think in some ways, right? I think there is a lot of
Mm.
sadness and tragedy around being a human. Uh, is that I mean, is that true? I feel like that's true, but and I don't mean that in a there's no hope and life is terrible, we should all just, do the ultimately terrible thing and leave this world. I don't think that's the case, but I think, again, knowledge, there is some power, I think, in understanding that as humans we suffer, and that's part of the process. Do you think that's a fair statement?
It's fair. It's wise. It's I mean, it's ancient in its origins,
Mm,
and it can be so helpful. I mean, that's really what Stoic philosophy is about.
yeah,
Like, yeah, oh, life is hard. Yes, it is hard.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
I had a period of my life where I was really suffering with a chronic illness. I had no explanation for it,
mm,
and one night I was in a particular low. I was just thinking, oh, this sucks. I can't take this.
yeah,
It shouldn't be like this. And I happened to get an email from uh, a modern Stoic philosopher that I knew. And there's a passage from his book, and it said something um, like you have suffered, like you will suffer, and to be alive is to suffer. And something like if you can develop gratitude for this point, then you will have understood the purpose of life or something. It was much
right.
better said than that. But
Is
but
that Ryan Holiday?
oh no,
Oh,
it
okay.
was but yeah, similar approach. It was Bill Ferriola,
Oh, okay.
that he'd written a book. He's written several books that are worth checking out.
Mm,
But the central point was that suffering is part of life,
yeah,
and there was something deeply comforting about that. Like, oh, because it felt like life was doing me wrong. Like this
right,
shouldn't be happening.
right.
Like this doesn't belong to me. Things
Yeah,
should be better. Things should be easier.
yeah,
When I just realized, like, no, life is hard, and you're gonna
yeah,
suffer, and you'll suffer more. This won't be the end of it.
yeah,
Oh, then I could stop struggling. I could just let it be difficult. I didn't have to
yeah.
fight the difficulty.
Yeah. There's for me, I agree. There's comfort in that. There's
Mm.
for whatever weird reason. It's just, I guess it makes you feel like it's not your fault, so to speak. It's like, this is just what
Yes.
happens.
It's not personal.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So let's swing back around to these negative traits, and what do we do about it? What if we notice that? I mean, and there's probably different answers for each one. We can dive in as needed, but what if we realize that we're not an agreeable and we're an angry person? What do we do about that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, and again, we've sort of we haven't used this word exactly, but we've talked about this idea. Have compassion for ourselves.
Hmm.
Like, you're angry. Yeah, yeah, of course. Or you're, not agreeable. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and there are probably good reasons for that. It's probably not hard to, you don't have to look far to understand why that might be.
Sure.
So start with compassion. And then related to that, and coming back to what we were talking about, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
It's not a personal failing that
Yeah.
you're disagreeable. It's not like
Yeah.
you designed your personality or your childhood for that matter.
Yeah.
There are things, there are factors and forces at work. And, you were talking about that's a lot of this is just part of being human,
Yeah.
like suffering. And it's not like being a difficult person is this rare thing that very
Right.
few people experience. Like, yeah, that happens a lot. And it's sort of like life plays its way through us. And
Yeah.
it feels like, oh, I have these problems and I'm a bad person. I need to be better.
Yeah.
And we can work to improve how we meet the world, but not from that place of I'm deficient, I'm
Right.
inadequate.
Yeah. And isn't that part of some of that's also a trait that develops, right? Would you say that goes hand in hand, sort of this, like, I'm not a good person, and agreeable and lack of agreeableness, or aggression, isn't that, aren't they
Oh
sort of
man.
tied?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it makes me think about the like the more we struggle with some of these traits, so we might say like the worse our personality is, to sort of put it, baldly.
Right.
Um, the more likely we are to feel bad about the personality that we have. Right. So the more critical we're going to be of ourselves for what we see as these faults. So yeah, it's a man, kind of, it can be a painful loop to be
Well,
in.
speaking of loops, and I mean, I did one recently on negative thought loops, and what's your recommendation for someone that's just, he is maybe he's a 6 months to a year out from the divorce, from the separation, even not maybe not even the divorce, and he is just, he sees no hope. And this is, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here with the words of wisdom question, but
Mm,
what, and when some, maybe I'll take that back a little bit. When someone's, forget the all that other stuff, but when someone is down in the dumps, so to speak, or maybe even more severe than that, like, what is the, how do they get out of that? What would you say to that person? And again, I may be stealing from my last question a little bit here, but um, maybe focus on, like, what steps can you take?
yeah.
What?
Well, I mean, the first thing I do is talk to someone. So
Mm.
either a trusted loved one,
Yeah.
maybe a therapist. Um, Obviously, that's something that you encourage. That won't be
Oh
new
yeah.
to listeners.
No.
But I'll focus this answer on, one thing that's been shown to be really effective, especially for someone who may actually be depressed, is, I mean, it's super simple. It sounds kind of like stupidly simple,
Right.
but it's called behavioral activation. Basically, it means just like doing shit that feels good in one way or another.
Mm.
So it can either be fun, so something you enjoy doing,
Right.
or something that's important to do. Like, all
Mm.
right, I need to do the laundry, I need to take out the trash, or
Right.
I need to go to work or pick up my kids. And those two things give a sense of, I mean, it triggers the brain in a certain way that tends to lift mood. So it seems so obvious, like, do things that kind of are rewarding in some way, and you'll lift your mood. But over time, it's super effective. Research studies show it tends to be at least as effective as antidepressant medication, and possibly even better in the long run, if you stop treatment. And then obviously the benefits can continue with therapy versus medication. Kind of that's it.
Where do you fall on the medication versus therapy question? I mean, I think both can be effective. I think therapy is a little bit more of a, I don't know. I don't want to say positive, because that I do think that pharmacology, medication, I think that has a place and can be effective, but I wonder sometimes if we don't lean on it too much. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I probably fall in a similar camp as you, Michael. That for some people medication can be helpful. Some people even have found it life-saving.
Yeah,
But I think we've really been sold kind of a bill of goods around medication, with this
yeah,
idea that depression is this one, specific shift in your brain chemistry, and that you
right,
need, so it's like a lock, and only the key of, so like a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor or other
right.
prescription medication can unlock that key. Can is the key that can unlock that lock.
Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the data, for the most part, I mean, um, there are certainly medications that can be as effective as therapy.
mm,
But again, therapy tends to be more effective, even for, I mean, the right type of therapy, even for severe depression. And again, the stuff you learn stays with you. The side effects of therapy tend to be positive, not negative.
yeah,
And I think I agree. I think medication is too often the go-to, which I don't blame people with depression for. I think it's what's been marketed. And if you don't know any better, you think, well, I need the quote unquote real treatment. I need the
right,
medication. Whereas
yeah,
there are a lot of other things that work too.
yeah. In terms of like stigma, do you think medication is? I would. I don't know which one's more stigmatized, therapy or medication. I don't know. What?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure there are research data
Yeah,
on that, but I don't know offhand, but I have the same impression that you have, that when you get into things that are directly working on the pharmacology of the nervous system, it seems like those would probably tend to be more stigmatizing.
yeah. Well, in some ways, I'm glad in some ways, but at least it seems like it feels like I don't have any data. I love data, but I don't have any. It feels like therapy is becoming less stigmatized. Like it's not as it used to be. Like it's not looked at in the same way that maybe 20 years ago it was.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I definitely think that's shifted.
So besides recognizing these things, having compassion, obviously I think getting into therapy, what are some of the other things you can do, maybe particularly with neuroticism, but all of these negative traits? What are some things besides those things? Are any other things that you would recommend guys to do if they recognize some of these things in themselves?
Mm. Well, I mean, working with any type of mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
practice will tend to help. So whether it's meditation or other formal practices like yoga or tai chi, or many others, and also just bringing that kind of mindful presence into your everyday experience.
Yeah,
It does lots of things. I think we're still finding out what this ancient practice is actually doing on a behavioral and cognitive and a brain level.
yeah,
But it can help to quiet some of that emotional reactivity, give us a chance to pause, like, right, I'm going to check in with myself before I
yeah,
just give into this automatic reaction. It can
yeah.
help us to become more aware of the types of stories we're telling ourselves that may not be
Mm-hmm.
helpful, about like how awful this person that I'm getting divorced from is, or what a
Right.
terrible person I am.
Yeah.
um, and uh, and just gives us more flexibility and more freedom in choosing our actions. So yeah, I think a consistent meditation or mindfulness practice is really key. And I have a favorite app I could recommend.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, a lot of people really, I mean, there are really popular ones that people like Headspace and Calm. People are familiar with,
Yep.
and a lot of people probably know, but maybe others haven't heard of one called Waking Up,
No.
which is it's Sam Harris's
Oh,
app.
okay. Yeah, I like Sam Harris.
Yeah, yeah, he has great content on there. They're adding more all the time. Full disclosure, I have a series on there, but I
Oh,
was
that's awesome.
yeah, it was really fun to be a part of that.
Wait,
But I was
wait, do you know Sam Harris?
I don't know Sam Harris. No,
Oh, damn
no,
it.
I know. Yeah.
I was hoping I can get him on the podcast.
Oh, that'd be great, wouldn't it?
Oh man, there's
Um,
so many folks that I would love to have on. But that's, I mean, still cool that how did you become a part of it? How did you
I think it was through my most recent book, and
okay.
his content person
Uh,
reached out to me. I think we had sent a book to Sam Harris, the publisher had,
okay.
um, and so yeah, my name came up, and um, but yeah, it's yeah, great content on that app, and it's really, I mean, the emphasis really is on kind of emotional, like freedom from the emotional entanglement that so many of
Mm,
us experience, and maybe
yeah.
especially if we're dealing with really difficult times. There's so many testimonials of people saying like this got me through,
Yeah.
really dark time in my life, and so yeah, definitely recommend that.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Seth, I thank you so much for doing this. This is everything that I hoped it would be. And as you know, the last question that I ask everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man that is just starting his divorce
Mm,
process?
yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say the main thing I would recommend is, I mean, it's, as you know, Michael, there's so much turmoil ahead, at the beginning of a divorce, throughout. I mean, even, if there's co-parenting
Hmm.
to follow. And so the mind is going to be saying all kinds of things. Our mind's going to be telling us a lot of stories. Some are going to be true, some aren't going to be true. And so if we can notice the stories our mind is telling, and then just, so first of all, just notice them. Notice that the things our minds are saying aren't necessarily true. They could be fiction, they could be fact,
Yeah.
but just notice that they're stories, and then ask if there's evidence to support them or not. And seeing through those stories can really, again, grant us freedom. One more thing along those lines, I think that really helps is to stay really close to your experience. Like to really, when you're, especially when you feel you're starting to sink into something unhelpful,
Mm,
to ask yourself, like, what is actually happening right now?
right.
What's actually happening? And that can cut through a lot of the interpretations and the fabrications and the distortions that the mind is feeding us. And say, like, all right now what's happening is I want one thing, my soon-to-be ex-wife wants something else.
Yeah.
We disagree about that. And everything else is kind of a mental overlay. So let me work with what's real. And I think that can be a real way to be kind to ourselves throughout this whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Thank you again, Dr. Seth. I really appreciate that. How can people find you and your books? What's the best way to find your content or get in touch with you?
Great. Yeah, the best way is probably just to go to my website, sethgillihan.com. You can find links to my books, blog, and everything else there, courses. Or if you just search for my name on Amazon or some other bookseller, you'll find my books there.
Awesome. Thank you again. I really appreciate this. I hope that we can do it again sometime. And, I thank you so very much.
You're very welcome, Michael. This was a great discussion. Thanks a lot for having me on.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.